The sun was a hammer in a brass sky, beating down on the year 1874. John Carver felt it on his back as he split wood, each swing of the axe a grunt against the droning of the cicadas. Sweat cut clean paths through the grime on his jaw. This was his life now. The axe, the wood, the silence. A silence he had earned, a silence he had built around himself and his little girl, Abigail, like a fortress. He set the axe down, the thud of it feeling final, and that's when he heard it. A knock. It was so faint, so timid, he thought it was a branch falling or a trick of the heat. His cabin was a lonely island, miles from anything you could call a town. No one came out this far. Ever. Then it came again. 3 taps, like a bird pecking at the wood. John wiped his brow with the back of his hand and pulled the heavy door inward. The light was blinding, and for a second, all he saw were 2 small, wavering shapes. Then his eyes adjusted. 2 little girls, twins by the look of them, stood on his porch. Their dresses were rags, their faces were smudged with tears and dirt, and their feet were bare against the scorching planks. They couldn't have been more than 5 years old. Their eyes, wide and blue and terrified, fixed on him. One of them took a shaky breath, her voice a tiny whisper. "Mama," she said. "She's hurt. In the old cabin." The other one nodded, her little fist clutching her sister's hand so tight her knuckles were white. "She's dying." The words hit John harder than a mule's kick. He felt the air leave his lungs. From the shadows inside his own cabin, he saw Abigail watching, her 6-year-old face a mask of confusion. He knelt down, the motion cracking his knees. The girl smelled of dust and fear. "Where?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. The first girl pointed a trembling finger toward the north ridge, toward the ruins, a place good for nothing but coyotes and ghosts, a collection of collapsed cabins left by folks who couldn't handle the harshness of the land. He knew the place well. He'd passed it 100 times. He never thought of it as anything more than a graveyard for old dreams. He didn't ask why their mother was there, or who had hurt her. The fear in their eyes was answer enough. Someone had done this. Someone had left them to this fate. Without another word, he stood up and took each of their hands. They felt as fragile as sparrow bones in his big, calloused grip. He looked back at his own daughter, standing in the doorway clutching her doll. "Stay inside, Abby girl," he said, his voice softer than he intended. She nodded, but her eyes were filled with a familiar loneliness, the look of a child who knew what it was to lose a mother. The walk to the ridge was a haze of heat and dust. The twins trotted ahead, their tiny legs moving faster than he thought possible, fueled by a terror he could only imagine. His own boots felt heavy, each step weighed down by a memory of a different sickness, a different bedside, a different prayer that went unanswered. The grave mound behind his cabin was proof of that. The ruined cabin sagged in the distance, its door hanging open like a broken mouth. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of mildew and defeat. And there, on a pile of rags in the corner, was the woman. She was barely conscious. Her arms were a map of dark bruises, one bent at an angle that made John's stomach turn. Her lips were cracked and bloody. Her breathing was a shallow, fragile thing. The twins rushed to her side, whispering, "Mama!" Her eyes fluttered open. They were the same watery blue as her daughter's. They found her children, and then they drifted up to John, who filled the doorway, blocking the sun. Fear flickered in her gaze, then shame. "Forgive me," she rasped, her voice like dry leaves skittering across the ground. I don't." John didn't let her finish. He knelt beside her, his fingers gently finding the pulse at her wrist. It was weak, thready, but it was there. Fever radiated from her skin. "What's your name?" he asked. It wasn't an accusation. It was an anchor. "Lily," she whispered. He lifted her. She weighed almost nothing, a bundle of pain and bone held together by a thread of life. He was careful not to jostle her broken arm. The twins followed him out of the darkness of the ruin and back into the unforgiving sun, their bare feet making soft, pattering sounds in the dust. Every step back to his cabin felt like a judgment. He knew what people would say. A widower, taking in a strange, battered woman with 2 children. The whispers in town would spread faster than a prairie fire. But what was he supposed to do? Let her die? Let those 2 little girls watch their mother fade away in a filthy, abandoned shack? His own heart may have been scarred over, but it wasn't made of stone. When he reached his cabin, Abigail was waiting on the porch, her face pale. Her eyes went wide as he carried Lily across the threshold. He laid the woman down on his own bed, the one he had built with his own 2 hands, the one where his wife had. He pushed the thought away. The sheets were clean, smelling of cedar. Lily flinched as she felt the soft cloth, trying to turn away. "I shouldn't," she murmured. "I don't deserve." John didn't answer with words. He wasn't a man for words. He was a man of action. He set water to boil. He tore strips of clean linen. He ground up herbs from the jar on the shelf. He worked with a quiet, focused intensity, bathing her forehead, splinting her arm as best he could, spooning warm broth between her cracked lips. His silence wasn't coldness. It was a language all its own. Abigail watched from the corner, her rag doll held tight against her chest. She never took her eyes off Lily. The twins, exhausted and finally feeling safe, had curled up together on the rug by the fire, fast asleep. As dusk settled, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Lily stirred. She lifted her good hand, her fingers trembling as they reached out and brushed against Abigail's dark hair. "You're a brave girl," Lily whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Abigail flinched at the touch, surprised. Then, hesitantly, she picked up a cup of water from the bedside table and held it to Lily's lips. The cup wobbled, but Lily drank, her parched throat working. In that small, quiet moment, something shifted in the little cabin. A connection was forged. A girl who had lost a mother and a woman who had been failed by the world. It was the beginning of something. But outside, trouble was already brewing. Martha Pike, a woman whose eyes missed nothing and whose tongue spared no one, saw the extra smoke rising from John's chimney. She saw the shadows moving inside his window. She stopped on the road, her mouth twisting into a sour line. "He's taken someone in," she hissed to her companion. "Mark my words, the town won't stand for it." Her words slithered off into the twilight, poison looking for a place to seep in. Inside the cabin, the only sound was the crackling of the fire and the soft breathing of the children. John sat at the table, his big hands resting on the rough-hewn wood. He watched Lily sleep, her breathing a little steadier now. He looked at the 3 children, 3 innocent lives now under his roof, under his protection. A choice had been made the moment he opened his door. He had invited this storm into his life. He just didn't know if he was strong enough to face it when it broke. The night deepened, and John Carver sat awake, knowing that his quiet, lonely world had been shattered forever, and he had no idea what was going to rise from the pieces. The days that followed were a quiet routine of healing. John would work his land, the rhythmic thud of his axe a steady heartbeat for the small world inside his cabin. Lily, against his protests, insisted on helping. She moved with a pained slowness at first, her bandaged arm held close to her body, but she swept the floors, stirred the stew, and mended the children's torn clothes with a quiet determination. She never spoke of what happened to her. She never mentioned who had left her for dead in that ruin. It was a locked room inside her, and John didn't have the key. He watched her with Abigail. He saw the gentle way she braided Abby's hair, her fingers, though still bruised, moving with a mother's grace. He saw Abigail begin to unfurl, the tight bud of her loneliness blooming in the warmth of Lily's attention. The twins, Anna and Ella, were like two little sunbeams, their laughter filling the corners of the cabin that had been silent for so long. For the first time in 2 years, his house felt like a home. But every time he looked at Lily, a question gnawed at him. She was a good woman, a kind woman. What kind of monster would do that to her? Her story, the little she had offered, was thin. Cruel in-laws, she had whispered one evening, her eyes fixed on the fire. They wanted her husband's land. They drove her out. It made sense, he supposed. Greed could make monsters of anyone, but something about it felt incomplete. There was a fear in her eyes that went deeper than a dispute over property. It was the fear of a hunted animal. One afternoon, Abigail came running to him while he was fixing a fence post. She was holding something in her small, outstretched hand. It was a small bird, carved from a piece of pine, worn smooth with time. "Look, Papa," she said. "Anna gave it to me. It looks just like the ones Mama used to make." John's blood ran cold. He took the bird from her. The craftsmanship was unmistakable, the same simple, elegant lines, the same notch on the wing. It was identical to the little carvings his late wife, Sarah, used to leave all over the cabin. He had found them in drawers, on shelves, tucked into his coat pockets, little tokens of her love. "Where did she get this?" he asked, his voice tight. "She said her mama made it for her," Abigail replied, oblivious to the storm gathering inside him. That night he couldn't sleep. The little bird sat on the table, a silent accusation in the flickering lamplight. A coincidence. It had to be. Carving was a common pastime, but it was too perfect, too exact. He looked over at Lily, asleep in the chair by the fire, the children curled at her feet. Who was she? Really? The next morning, he decided to ride into town for supplies. He needed an excuse to clear his head, to put some distance between himself and the puzzle living under his roof. As he was tying his horse to the post outside the general store, Martha Pike descended on him, like a hawk on a field mouse. "John Carver," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "We've all heard about your charity." "It's not charity, Martha," he said, his jaw tight. "It's decency." "Is that what they're calling it?" She sniffed, her sharp eyes scanning his face. "Funny thing, the woman you've taken in, she looks awfully familiar. Reminds me of a woman who came through with a traveling medicine show a few years back. A real charmer she was, left a few good men with empty pockets and broken hearts." John felt a flash of anger. "You're mistaken." "Am I?" she said, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "This woman, this Lily, she wouldn't happen to have a talent for carving little birds, would she?" The world seemed to tilt on its axis. He stared at her, his mind reeling. How could she know that? He hadn't told a soul. Before he could form a reply, she leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Be careful, John. Some women are traps dressed up as victims. And you, poor man, look like you're about to walk right into one." She swept away, leaving him standing there in the dust, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The coincidence of the bird was one thing, but Martha Pike knowing about it, that was something else entirely. That was impossible. Unless it wasn't a coincidence at all. He abandoned his shopping and rode back to the cabin, a sense of urgency propelling him forward. The simple, quiet life he had been building was a lie. The peace he had started to feel was an illusion. He was living with a stranger, a woman of secrets, and he had willingly brought her into his home, into his daughter's life. When he burst through the door, Lily looked up, startled. The twins were playing on the floor, and Abigail was sitting at the table, drawing on a piece of slate. "We need to talk," he said, his voice hard. He pulled the carved bird from his pocket and slammed it down on the table. "Where did you get this?" Lily's face went pale. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking as fragile as she had the day he found her. Her eyes darted toward the children, then back to him. I carved it, she stammered. It's just a trinket. Don't lie to me, he growled, the sound raw and torn from his throat. My wife carved these, exactly like this. And Martha Pike seems to think you're some kind of grifter who passed through town years ago. So you're going to tell me the truth. All of it, right now. Tears welled in Lily's eyes, spilling down her pale cheeks. She looked at him, her expression a mixture of terror and despair. You don't understand, she whispered, her voice breaking. If I tell you, he'll find me. He'll find us. Who? John demanded, taking a step closer. Who is going to find you? My husband, she choked out, a sob escaping her lips. John stopped dead in his tracks. Your husband? You told me you were a widow. I am, she cried, shaking her head frantically. He died. But his brother is a monster. He thinks I know where my husband hid his money. He's been hunting me ever since. The in-laws. The story. I had to make something up. I was desperate. The story tumbled out of her, a torrent of fear and pain. Her husband had been a gambler, a cheat, mixed up with a dangerous crowd. He had stolen a large sum of money from his own brother, a man named Elias, before he was killed in a card game gone wrong. Elias, convinced Lily knew the location of the stolen fortune, had been hunting her across the territory. He was the one who had beaten her, the one who had left her in the ruins to die. He told me he'd let me go if I told him where it was, she wept. But I don't know. I never knew. I swear it. As for the bird, she explained that she had seen one in the abandoned cabin, a dusty old carving left on a windowsill. Desperate to connect with Abigail, she had copied it, hoping the small gift would win the little girl's affection. It was a lie born of desperation, a foolish attempt to build a bridge. John listened, his anger slowly being replaced by a cold dread. The story was plausible. It explained the deep, hunted fear in her eyes. It explained everything. But as he looked at her, sobbing by the hearth, a tiny, insistent voice in the back of his mind whispered that it explained everything a little too well. It was a perfect story, a neat and tidy package of victimhood that answered all of his questions. Too perfect. That night, sleep was a stranger. John sat by the dying fire, the cabin silent around him, and turned the facts over and over in his mind. Lily's story made sense, but Martha Pike's words still echoed in his ears. A trap dressed up as a victim. He wanted to believe Lily. He saw the way she cared for the children, the genuine warmth in her eyes. But he had been fooled by a woman's warmth once before. His own wife, Sarah, had been a woman of secrets. Secrets he only learned after she was in the ground. He remembered the last weeks of her life. The fever, yes, but also the fear. The way she would jump at every unexpected sound. The way she would stare out the window for hours, as if expecting someone. He had chalked it up to the illness making her delirious. Now he wasn't so sure. He had to know for certain. Before the sun was up, while the others were still asleep, he slipped out of the cabin. He didn't saddle his horse. He walked, needing the cold morning air to clear the fog from his brain. He walked toward the North Ridge, toward the ruins. Lily had said she found the original carved bird there. If that was true, it might still be there. It was a small thing, but it was a loose thread, and he had a feeling that if he pulled on it, this whole thing might unravel. The abandoned cabin was even more decrepit in the grey morning light. He stepped through the broken doorway, the floorboards groaning under his weight. He scanned the room. The pile of rags where he had found Lily was still there. The windows were caked with years of grime. He ran his hand along the dusty sills. Nothing. He searched the whole cabin, his frustration growing. There was no bird. Not on the sills, not on the broken mantel, not on the floor. She had lied about that too. A small lie, perhaps, but it was another crack in the foundation of her story. He was about to leave when his boots scuffed against a loose floorboard near the hearth. He knelt down, his fingers prying at the edge. The wood creaked and then lifted. Underneath was a small dark space. His heart hammered against his ribs. Elias was looking for money. Maybe this was it. Maybe Lily had lied about not knowing where it was. He reached into the darkness. His fingers closed around something that wasn't a bag of coins. It was hard, rectangular, and bound in leather. He pulled it out into the light. It was a journal. He knew that journal. He had given it to Sarah on their first anniversary. Her initials were still faintly visible, embossed in the worn leather. His breath caught in his throat. Why would her journal be here? He sat down on the dusty floor, his hands trembling as he opened it. The pages were filled with her familiar, elegant script. He flipped through entries he remembered her writing. Descriptions of wildflowers, a recipe for berry pie, a note about Abigail taking her first steps. Then he got to the last few pages. The handwriting changed. It was rushed, frantic. The ink smudged in places, as if by tears. The dates were from the week she died. He's found me, the first entry read. I don't know how. After all these years, John can never know the truth of who I was before I met him. He is a good man. He would not understand. John's blood turned to ice. He kept reading. I told John it's the fever making me weak, but it's fear. Elias is in the next town. He's asking questions. He looks older, but I recognized him instantly. The same cruel eyes. He wants the money. The money I thought was long gone. The money I gave away to be free of that life. I have to run. The final entry was barely legible. There is no escape. He is closing in. I have a plan. A desperate one. There is a woman in town, a poor soul with 2 girls dying of consumption. Her name is Lily. She looks enough like me from a distance. I will make a trade. My life for hers. I will fake my death. It's the only way to keep Abigail safe, to keep John safe. I will go to the old cabin on the ridge. I left a sign for my sister, the bird we used to carve as girls. If she ever comes looking for me, she will know. Forgive me, John. My dearest John. Forgive me for the lies. John stared at the page, the words blurring before his eyes. It couldn't be true. Sarah. His quiet, gentle Sarah. Part of a gang, a thief, and a sister. She had never mentioned a sister. He felt a wave of nausea. He had buried a stranger, a poor dying woman named Lily, and the woman living in his house, the woman his daughter was beginning to call Mama, the woman he had started to feel something for. She wasn't a widow named Lily, she was Sarah, his wife, and she had faked her own death. He stumbled out of the cabin, the journal clutched in his hand, his mind a whirlwind of betrayal and confusion. He saw it all now, the familiar way she moved around his cabin, the way she knew exactly which herbs to use for a fever. The carved bird wasn't a copy, it was a message, and the story about Elias, her husband's brother. It was a lie built on a foundation of truth. Elias was real, he was hunting her, but he wasn't her brother-in-law, he was her past, a past that had just caught up with her. As he stood there on the ridge, the sun breaking over the mountains, he saw a rider approaching his cabin from the direction of town. The man sat tall in the saddle, dressed in the fine clothes of a gentleman. Even from a distance, John recognized him. It was Judge Ezra Boone, the man who represented the law in these parts, the man who had signed his wife's death certificate 2 years ago. John started running. The journal felt like a lead weight in his hand. He wasn't running to confront his wife. He was running to protect his family from the man who had just arrived at his door, the man who was not a judge, the man who was, he now knew with chilling certainty, Elias. And he had finally found what he was looking for. John crashed through the trees, his lungs burning, the world narrowed to a single point. His cabin door. He saw the judge, Ezra Boone, dismounting, a polite smile on his face that didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. He saw Lily freeze in the doorway, her face a mask of pure terror. She knew exactly who this was. He burst into the clearing, the journal held out in front of him like a shield. "Get away from my house," he yelled, his voice ragged. Boone turned, his smile faltering for just a fraction of a second. He looked from John's face to the journal in his hand, and a look of understanding dawned. The polite facade crumbled, replaced by a sneer. "Carver," he said, his voice smooth as oiled leather. "I was just coming to pay my respects to the grieving widow. It seems congratulations are in order instead. You found yourself a new wife, or should I say, you found your old one." Abigail and the twins, drawn by the shouting, were huddled behind Sarah. Sarah pushed them back into the cabin, her eyes locked on Boone. "John, get inside," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "Not until he's gone," John said, planting his feet. "This is over, Elias." The name hung in the air. Boone, or Elias, actually chuckled. "So she finally told you. I'm impressed. I didn't think she had it in her. But you don't know the whole story, do you, Farmer? You don't know what she really is." "I know she left your life behind," John shot back. "I know you've been hunting her." "Hunting her?" Elias laughed again. "I'm not hunting her. I'm collecting a debt. She and I were partners. We took a tidy sum from a bank in St. Louis. Only she got scared, ran off with the whole score, left me to take the fall." "I gave it away," Sarah cried from the doorway. "I gave it all to a church orphanage. It was cursed money." "An orphanage?" Elias's face darkened with rage. "You lying witch, you've had it stashed away all this time. And I'm here to collect. Now you can give it to me, or I can take it from you, piece by piece, starting with the children." He took a step toward the cabin. John moved to block him, his hands curling into fists. He was a woodsman, not a fighter, but he would die before he let this man touch his family. "You're not touching them," John said, his voice a low growl. "Brave words," Elias sneered, "but you're just one man." He whistled sharply. From the woods on either side of the cabin, two more men emerged, rough-looking characters with pistols tucked into their belts. They fanned out, their expressions grim. John was surrounded. The lawman was the outlaw. The whole town, the whole structure of his world, was a lie. And then another figure appeared, walking up the path from the road. It was Martha Pike. She walked right up to Elias and stood beside him, her face twisted in a triumphant smirk. "I told you I'd find her for you," she said. "I told you she was hiding something. Now where's my share?" Elias gave her a dismissive glance. "You'll get what you're owed when I get what I'm owed." It all clicked into place. Martha's suspicion wasn't just gossip. She was an informant. Elias had placed her in town to watch, to listen. She had been his eyes and ears all this time. The so-called town gossip was a spy. "You see, John," Elias said, his confidence restored, "your whole peaceful little world is a cage I built. I've just been waiting for the rat to show herself, and now the fun begins." He nodded to his men. "Get the children." One of the men started toward the door. Sarah screamed, but John was already moving. He wasn't a gunman, but he was strong, and he was desperate. He grabbed the axe he'd left by the woodpile. The heavy blade felt familiar, an extension of his own arm. "The first one who takes a step closer loses a foot," he snarled. The men hesitated. They had guns, but John Carver with an axe in his hand was a fearsome sight. He was a man with nothing left to lose, a man defending his home. Elias's eyes narrowed. He was losing control of the situation. "Don't be a fool, Carver. You can't win." "I don't have to win," John said, his gaze as hard as iron. "I just have to last long enough." He had no idea what he meant by that, but it sounded good. It sounded like a plan, and right then he needed a plan more than he needed air. Sarah, seeing his resolve, seemed to find her own. She herded the children into the back room. "Barricade the door," she yelled to Abigail. Then she reappeared, holding John's heavy hunting rifle. She wasn't an expert shot, but she knew how to use it. She stood in the doorway beside him, the rifle barrel steady. The farmer and his long-lost wife standing shoulder to shoulder against the corrupt judge and his gang. It was a scene from a dime novel. But the threat was real, the guns were real, and the fear was a cold, hard knot in John's stomach. "This is your last chance, Sarah," Elias shouted, his patience gone. "The money." "There is no money," she screamed back, her voice filled with a rage John had never heard from her before. You made me a thief, you made me a liar, but you will not make me a coward, not anymore. Elias raised his own pistol, aiming it directly at Sarah. Wrong answer. But before he could fire, a different sound split the air, not a gunshot. A whistle, a loud, piercing whistle from the woods behind the cabin. Elias and his men froze, looking around in confusion. John allowed himself a grim smile. I said I just had to last long enough. It was a bluff, a desperate, hopeless bluff. He hadn't sent for anyone. There was no one coming. He'd just hoped to buy a few seconds to throw them off balance. But then it happened again. The whistle, closer this time, and it was answered by another from the other side of the clearing. Elias's face went from rage to confusion and then to a dawning, horrified realization. He had walked into a trap. But it wasn't John's trap. From the trees, figures began to emerge. They weren't lawmen. They were hard-faced men from the town. The blacksmith, the livery owner, the trappers from up the mountain. Men who knew John Carver. Men who knew him as a quiet, honest neighbor. And they were all armed. The blacksmith, a mountain of a man named Peters, stepped forward. Judge Boone, he said, his voice a low rumble. We heard some troubling rumors about you not being who you say you are, about you threatening one of our own. Martha Pike's face was ashen. He's lying. John Carver is harboring a criminal. We know all about Sarah, Martha, Peters said, spitting on the ground near her feet. A friendly trapper heard your little conversation with the judge on the road this morning. Seems you've got a loud voice when you think no one's listening. He rode into town and told us everything. The bluff had been real. John had been so lost in his own head, he hadn't even seen the trapper passing by the ridge when he'd been running back. That small, unseen detail had saved them. Elias's men looked at their boss, then at the dozen armed townsfolk surrounding them. They slowly raised their hands. Elias, however, was not giving up. With a snarl, he grabbed Martha Pike, pulling her in front of him as a shield and pressing his pistol to her head. Stay back, he screamed. I'll kill her. Martha shrieked in terror, her loyalty evaporating in the face of a gun barrel. Don't shoot, please. John lowered his axe slightly. He wouldn't see even a woman like Martha get shot down. But Sarah didn't hesitate. The hunting rifle cracked. The shot was deafening in the sudden silence. Not at Elias, not at Martha. Sarah had aimed at the ground, just in front of his feet. The dirt exploded, spraying rock and soil into his face. Elias yelled in pain and surprise, stumbling backward, his grip on Martha loosening. In that instant, John charged. He didn't use the axe. He hit Elias with his shoulder, a solid driving force that sent the smaller man flying. Elias's pistol went spinning into the dirt. John was on him in a second, his fist connecting with Elias's jaw with a sickening crunch. The fight was over before it began. The townsmen swarmed the other two thugs, disarming them and tying their hands with rope from John's barn. It was finished. Elias lay groaning on the ground. Martha Pike was sobbing hysterically. The townsfolk stood around, grim-faced and silent, rifles held ready. John stood over his defeated enemy, his chest heaving. He looked at Sarah, who was lowering the rifle, her face pale but resolute. Their eyes met across the clearing, and in that moment, all the lies and all the secrets fell away. He saw not the stranger, not the liar, but his wife, the woman he had married, the mother of his child, stronger and braver than he had ever imagined. He walked over to her, his legs unsteady. He reached out and his hand found hers. It's over, he said. It's over, she repeated, her voice soft. We're safe. Abigail and the twins crept out of the cabin, their eyes wide. Abigail ran to her parents, wrapping her arms around both of their legs. Is the bad man gone, Papa? She asked. John looked down at her, and then at Sarah, and at the two little girls who were now, without question, his daughters. He looked at the home they had almost lost, and at the community that had, against all odds, come to save them. Yeah, Abby girl, he said, pulling them all into a hug. The bad man is gone. We're all safe now. Dignity, he realized, wasn't something a town gave you or took away. It wasn't about following the rules or avoiding gossip. It was about what you were willing to fight for. It was found in the heart of a man swinging an axe to protect his family, and in the steady hands of a woman holding a rifle to defend her home. They had been broken, both of them, by secrets and by the cruelty of the world. But together, they had found a way to be whole. The lies were buried, and from that troubled earth, something true and strong was finally beginning to grow. This story is a reminder that sometimes the biggest dangers aren't the ones you can see, but the secrets hidden in plain sight. And true justice isn't always found in a courtroom. Sometimes it's found when good people decide they've had enough. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next strange tale.